Welcome back as we continue our special hour-long look at the 2022 midterm elections, just over 2 months away, and many of the key races that will determine if and how the balance of power shifts in Congress. We now move west to Arizona, where the Senate balance of power could depend on 36-year-old Republican Blake Masters. The contested seat was previously held by Republican John McCain for 31 years and now by Democrat Mark Kelly. Let's start with Masters himself. Questions have arisen over Masters as a candidate, given some of his more controversial positions. For example, he sided with former President Trump on the discredited claims of election fraud in 2020. And recently, reports emerged that Masters once sent emails, while still a student at Stanford University, praising the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, even calling him an underrated thinker. The Unabomber killed 3 Americans in a bombing spree over 20 years and published a 35,000-word manifesto in an attempt to justify his attacks. Consequently, in August, the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, the arm that tries to get Republicans elected, slashed funding to Arizona and Masters. It was a sign the committee may be giving up on him. But this election's far from over. Abortion has also risen as a pivotal issue in the race since the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. Masters, on his campaign website, previously described himself as 100% pro-life. Since then, he appears to have scrubbed that language in order to conceal his position or minimize his position on this issue, as polling has showed that women voters are shifting to Democrats. Masters, in an interview this week, argued Democrats are just using abortion as a political ploy.
The Democrats, Mark Kelly in Arizona, he wants to just talk about abortion because they don't want to talk about the wide open southern border. They don't want to talk about double-digit inflation. They don't want to talk about how our kids are being taught transgender ideology in our schools.
And finally, the Arizona race again raises whether Donald Trump is party king or party spoiler. Trump endorsed Masters in the 5-way Republican primary. According to Real Clear Politics polling average, Masters is trailing Senator Mark Kelly, a one-time astronaut, by 6 points. A Fox News poll put Kelly in the lead by 8, which could be why some campaign watchers have suggested Kelly has been playing it safe by agreeing to only one debate when it comes to his party's relatively unpopular president. He said this.
Would you want President Biden to come to Arizona and campaign with you?
Hey, I'll welcome anybody to come to Arizona, travel around the state at any time, as long as I'm here. If I'm not up in Washington in session, and talk about what Arizona needs.
Well, it's not exactly an open invitation to President Biden to come and campaign with you, even though he won the state of Arizona.
It's a fair point. It sure doesn't seem like that. Then just north of Arizona, in Nevada, there's another key Senate race. Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto has been considered a vulnerable incumbent, but clings to narrow leads in the polls. Her challenge heading into the fall, holding on to Hispanic voters. And Senator Cortez Masto is Hispanic. First ever Hispanic woman elected to the Senate. She faces another Trump endorsee, former Nevada Attorney General Adam Laxalt, whose grandfather was once a Nevada senator. Like Masters in Arizona, Laxalt didn't just support Donald Trump's claim of election fraud. He filed several lawsuits to overturn Biden's win. He even said, quote, "There's no question they rigged the election." The polls remain tighter in Nevada than Arizona, and the Cook Political Report continues to call the race a toss-up, which could be a reason why Senator Cortez Masto has continued to cling to abortion as a key issue and even co-sponsored legislation in Congress to codify Roe v. Wade.
It's really a clear distinction of who's going to stand for women's rights and stand up for women and who isn't. And that's really what's at stake right now. And I know in my race in Nevada, this crosses party lines from Republicans, Democrats, and independents in my state. So this is about trusting women.
Well, and if that doesn't work, there could be big consequences come November. Julia Manchester of The Hill recently published this headline: Nevada could cost Democrats their Senate majority. Joining me now, longtime Arizona Democratic political consultant, Karl Gentles. Karl, thanks a lot for coming on the program. Appreciate it. All right, so some saying that Mark Kelly is laying low right now to try to ride this out to the finish kind of quietly. Do you think that's his strategy, and is it working?
Well, Dan, thanks for having me. I don't really think Mark Kelly is laying low. He's been out and around the state quite a number of times. He continues to have a very aggressive campaign that's really talking about the 3 main issues that we see here in Arizona in election integrity, women's right to choose, and also protecting democracy. And so those are things that he has been out talking about, and what I think is really appealing to voters right now, particularly the independent voters, which are going to be very important in the state of Arizona.
But he doesn't want Biden there, right?
Well, I didn't take that as he didn't want Biden there. I think I think it was still an invitation to bring him out. And I think Biden actually would be very strong.
Come on. That answer was not an invitation. That answer was a cop-out. Of course it was. That answer was saying, I can't say that because that won't happen. Look, and by the way, he deserves credit for recognizing Biden is not particularly popular in your state, right?
Well, look, Biden won the state in the last election, so his popularity may not be as strong as we'd like it to be, but I think he still has a power to pull and persuade those voters, those swing voters that are still trying to make up their minds. So I think actually his visit to Arizona, if he were to come, would be very beneficial.
So tell Kelly to ask him to come, as opposed to saying
we open
it to anyone. Anyone who wants to come, we welcome them to come. And, anyway. Look, Masters has been trying to change the discussion to issues that favor Republicans. Here's an example in a campaign ad.
You know what this says to me? It says the government gave up. They threw in the towel. This sign should be warning me about rattlesnakes, not about criminal narco-terrorist organizations.
So do you think that the sort of campaign ads that he has been putting out are working?
The challenge that Blake Masters has is that he's running against a very formidable candidate in Mark Kelly, who has been vetted for a number of years already. Blake Masters is relatively new to the scene, and so he is trying to really energize a portion of the Republican base to try and make up this lead that Mark Kelly has.
And it's a substantial lead.
It really is.
I'm not sure this is going to be that close of one, but it's certainly going to be one that we'll be watching. Karl Gentles, thank you so much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.